House Taxation, about said Transportation, that was on my brain, but House Taxation Committee to order. I wouldn't want to promote myself to Chair of Transportation, but first item of business would be requests for bill introductions. Do we have any requests? Seeing none, we will move on to open our hearing for House Bill 2499. I would first turn to the Revisor's Office for an overview, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2499 would provide for a refund for sales and compensating use taxes paid on the sale of property that a provider used or consumed in the provision of video services, internet access service, or telecommunications service. Pursuant to the bill, the limits of the refund would be allowed to the amount paid by the retailer, as long as the total amount of refund for all providers, would be less than $40 million, or a pro rata share of the $40 million based on the sales tax by an individual provider, and then for the whole amount of all claims. Lastly, subsection D of the bill would require that all refunds for the entire taxable year must be submitted between January 1 and April 1 of the following year. Any claims filed after April 1 would be deemed waived, and the refund would only apply to the state sales tax and not any city or county sales tax. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee, do we have any questions? Is the definition of property, is it pretty broad? It just can, is it any personal property, or is there any, I mean, I know it's a short bill, I did not see anything in there that really defined what is or is not eligible or considered property.
You're right, there is no link to the definition of property.
Okay. All right. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Adam. I'd like to welcome Department of Revenue to review the fiscal note, please.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Kansas Department of Revenue. We are estimating that House Bill 2499 would decrease the state revenues by $40 million in fiscal year 2023. Of that total, state general fund is estimated to decrease by $33.5 million and the state highway fund by $6.5 million. We assume that the max in refunds would be claimed.
Pretty straightforward for once. Committee, any questions? Yes, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathleen, you get up here and you start hearing so many numbers, your eyes about to glaze over. But it seems to me that this is one of the bigger fiscal notes. Is that accurate? Not the biggest, of course, but just in anything, is this one of the bigger fiscal notes?
I would probably say it's about maybe average. It's not one of the bigger ones.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any further questions? Yes, Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe one of the conferees can answer this, but what property do you use in your calculation, or what does that constitute exactly? Or like, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around what is generating this sales tax.
I would let the conferees probably talk to that if at all possible.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This might be a question more for the revisor than for you, but whoever needs to take it. Do we not, there's a lot of federal and state help for this kind of thing to install broadband and things, isn't there? That would be part of this that we're talking about, part of where the sales tax would be on some of those materials?
I believe there are some federal programs that would help with this, and probably some state programs as well, but I would not be able to speak to those.
Is there someone who would, or we maybe in one of the other proponents?
I don't think we have that right now. We could try to put some things together, but I think there's probably a comprehensive list of different state and federal programs, just speaking from my knowledge, but I don't know all the details.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any further questions for the Department of Revenue? Seeing none, thank you, Kathleen. This time, I'd open up the proponent section of testimony for House Bill 2499. And first, welcome to committee, Michael Ruffin, Regional Vice President for AT&T of Kansas.
You saved me a line or two by introducing me.
Welcome to committee.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, as you have already know, I'm here in support of HB 2499. This bill will make Kansas more competitive with our neighboring states by providing a limited tax refund for state sales and use taxes paid on equipment used to expand and improve communications networks. These networks allow all Kansans with wireline and wireless connectivity, broadband internet access, and video services. The tax refund established by the bill, as you've all just mentioned, is capped at $40 million, and it will be available to all communication providers. To date, and as many of you are already aware of too, Kansas has similar policies in place, an exemption or a refund for state and sales use taxes on inputs on the production of agriculture and manufacturing goods. This bill would afford the same tax benefit to the communications industry. This policy is important because, as of right now, this very moment, Kansas is at a competitive disadvantage. 22 other states, including Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, and Iowa, offer a tax refund or exemption or no sales tax at all on these types of equipment. I provided you all with a handout that highlights investment in communications infrastructure as presently treated in other states. In closing, I believe HB 2499 is a smart and necessary tax policy to ensure that Kansas will be more competitive with our neighboring states. AT&T remains committed to the state of Kansas. Just over the last 3 years, we've invested over $550 million into our networks. We look forward to continuing investments and furthering our mission of connection with each other, with people and businesses, and what they use every day to help themselves thrive. Happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ruffin. Committee, are there any questions? Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome. So I assume, and I think your testimony answered my question, but the sales tax you guys are paying are on the equipment used to provide internet and cell service across Kansas. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. So today, my assumption would be is that when you're looking at your return, you're probably just passing those charges back onto the consumer via charges of, I mean, not charges, but like baked into the sales price of
So
the
it
services
is a
provided.
two-tax fold situation in which when we purchase the network communications equipment, we're taxed. And then when the output itself, let's just say the AT&T fiber services, the consumer pays a tax there.
Okay. Yeah, I was looking at my internet bill earlier, and I saw a tax on my modem, but I didn't see one on my service necessarily, but I wasn't sure how it all worked.
I'm happy you're AT&T customer representative.
Thank you for your time.
Most definitely.
Representative Helgerson.
Thank you very much, but you got me confused. For this $40 million, I'm looking to see how it makes Kansas more competitive and how it gives the general population an advantage. I can give $40 million in tax relief in some other ways. Your business is going to benefit $40 million, and it's going to go to the stockholders. $40 million going to property taxes or other sales taxes or for food, that goes directly to the customers. And I don't see anywhere on my bill, on my AT&T bill, that I'd see this go passed on to the customers, to the Kansas taxpayers.
So Representative, this is not an actual AT&T tax bill. This is more of a communication tax bill to ensure that the state is more attractive, which would encourage more broadband communications network investments.
I kind of go back and go, wait a minute, more attractive. We have a lot of people out there trying to do the work here in Kansas. I don't know anybody that's saying we're not going to come to Kansas because of this sales tax. Is your company not going to come to Kansas because it's in effect? Go ahead.
No, we're committed to staying in Kansas. That by no inclination are we saying we're disinvesting or pulling out of Kansas. What we're saying is that I think the representative mentioned earlier in terms of there are some federal programs available, right? What you're referring to is the American Rescue Plan, federally funded program. This is a one-time legacy investment. And what we want to do is to establish a public-private partnership with our state officials, as well as our city leaders and local leaders, to form some type of partnership that would allow us to utilize federal resources to invest in broadband communications networks, whether that be through fiber optics or wireless improvements in connectivity.
Would I see $40 million worth of tax reduction in bills to consumers?
I cannot answer that question confidently, Representative.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ruffin, you're probably a better person to ask the question I asked previously. And I think you did say that you did receive funds from the American Rescue Plan and other plans to provide broadband in areas that are poorly served. And that's particularly in parts of Kansas. That's a big issue. Is that not true?
We did not. The AT&T has not received those funds. Those funds are with the state, are coming through the federal process. Well, what I'm saying is that we want to partner with the state in terms of developing a public-private partnership in which we can help build out networks of connectivity, right? So one of the things that we do really well at AT&T is that we believe in scale. We want to make sure that we have an established partnership by leveraging these one-time legacy federal resources to build out massive network and massive connectivity networks.
But so what you're saying is the state receives the money, but then they would contract with businesses like AT&T to provide those.
That will be up to the state's discretion in terms of how they want to execute and roll out their American Rescue Plan funding mechanism. I think in terms of the actual nuance, and this is more of a question for, I believe, the Department of Revenue. Mr. Adams gave a presentation on that earlier this afternoon in terms of what does the federal resources look like in terms of rolling those dollars out.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Michael. I might just step in, Representative Smith. Yeah, we had a presentation today in utilities from Stanley Adams, who is over at the Commerce Department, who oversees our broadband development program. And we have various sources of money coming from KDOT, $5 million this year, goes to $10 million next year. I think it's $80 million over 10 years, if I remember correctly. We're getting a lot of resources from the feds. The infrastructure, it will be, I think Stanley was saying it was maybe over 200 and some million. And there'll be restrictions or particulars that the private companies, if they want to achieve or get a grant, they have to go into unserved or underserved areas and put in broadband. So that's sort of a quick, I'm sorry, Michael.
No, you're fine.
I went with that. But my question is, and this is not only for you, Michael, but all the conferees, that if they have, I think right now the big push is fiber to the home. So I want to know from you and the other conferees, do you have those programs in place and you're building fiber to the home to expand bandwidth for customers? I just want to know, and that has been a decision made by your corporation and other corporations to do just that.
Yes. Yes. So right now, AT&T, we're going through a massive fiber overbuild project within the state of Kansas. I mean, right here in our backyard in the city of Topeka, Wichita, Lawrence, Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte County area, we're investing millions of dollars to ensure that what you're referring to, Representative Gartner, is fiber to the curb to the home, right? We've made a significant amount of investments in terms of making sure that local residents, customer locations have access to high-speed broadband connectivity. Fiber represents the latest and greatest of internet connectivity, right? If you think about the situation that we've been placed in due to the pandemic, it has been a game-changing situation for all of us, how we do business, how we work remotely, how we engage in our judicial process, and so on and so forth, right? How we entertain ourselves at home. What this experience has showed us is that there's a lot of congestion on our network. There's a lot of downloading, uploading, streaming services, and so what that means is there needs to be more investment, more fiber deployment. So at AT&T, our number one priority is connectivity through our fiber services. And if I can go on a little bit more, I would add and say that, the pandemic has created a huge demand on our network and the need for connectivity, working remotely, learning from home. I'm thinking about educating my young toddler, MJ, from home and virtually learning, playing educational games online. So what that means is that we have to have a strong network to be able to support those kind of efforts. And, we can't do it ourselves. We're not the only game or company in town. So we're relying on strong partnerships, both publicly and privately, to reach those areas, whether that be in our urban communities or our rural or underserved areas. And so we see federal resources, whether that be through the CARES Act funding, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Agreement, or the American Rescue Plan, as a once-in-a-legacy opportunity for us to just work collectively and ensure that, as we've realized and learned, that broadband is one of our most essential resources to how we function in the economy today.
One more, Mr. Chairman, for this conferee. Michael, I've read through the testimony, and a number of the conferees continue to talk about broadband, bringing larger bandwidths, and this would be an incentive for broadband expansion. I guess my follow-up question, and you sort of alluded to it, but is it really going to incentivize you to go to underserved or unserved areas and put in broadband?
Representative Gardner, I cannot predict the economic outcome or future of any sort, right? But what I can say is that these opportunities this opportunity creates us a platform for discussion and ways to explore and take a look at it. We know that some of our rural and underserved areas are a bit challenging and they're hard to get to, and sometimes they may not be economically feasible, but we won't just say because it's a rural neighborhood or a rural area, we won't go to it. We want to make sure that we have the conversation to learn and study and do all the homework. Now, I'm not the technical guy, but I'm more than happy to get those folks on board so we can have those discussions. So what does a rural or unserved broadband connectivity initiative look like? Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to refer, Mr. Chairman, to, I believe, the bill in Oklahoma. That passed last year, correct?
Yes, it did.
And it was a sales tax refund for broadband video services, et cetera. Was that bill basically to incentivize broadband in underserved and unserved areas?
To my knowledge and having conversations with my colleagues as part of our Oklahoma team, that the portion of that bill does include a bit of incentive or some type of language or provision that says that there will be efforts dedicated towards or investment dedicated towards unserved or underserved communities.
Okay, thank you.
Next, I have Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of continuing along the same line of questioning as Representative Gartner, and you may be only able to speak to AT&T. How many customers do you have in Kansas?
I'm sorry, how many what?
Customers do you have in Kansas?
I don't want to misquote. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but Representative Sanders, I'm happy to get back to you and let you know the exact customer count here.
Okay. And again, you may only be able to speak to AT&T, but do you have any sense of how many, in terms of geography, not population, how much of Kansas is unserved or underserved by reliable broadband?
That's a great question, Representative Sands. I don't have the answer for that readily available right now, but I'm more than happy to circle back with you and get that information to you.
And do you think that the industry has a goal of getting all of Kansas served? Maybe not just AT&T, but do you have any sense of that?
I'm not at liberty to speak on behalf of the entire industry. I think for AT&T's position that we are committed to deploying fiber and making sure that we're committed to deploying fiber connectivity, which is in line with our mission, making sure that we can connect as many homes and customers as we possibly can in the world.
Every place that you mentioned a moment ago was in an urban area. And I know so I'm just kind of asking the same question over, I guess. But does AT&T have a commitment to rural areas?
We have a commitment to provide network connectivity to the entire world. It's completely aligned with our mission. I don't think we're not in a position to say who gets connection and who doesn't, right? I don't think that's fair, right, or equitable in terms of where we are today in this time. Again, what this pandemic has shown us that the need for connectivity is well beyond essential, and we're committed to making sure that we can do all that we possibly can to make sure we connect everyone.
Thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next I have Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You had said earlier in your testimony that, and then you named other states, but we're at a competitive disadvantage with neighboring states. Could you isolate what is that competitive disadvantage we're at?
Meaning that when I said competitive disadvantage, these other states that I mentioned, among the 22 other states, we just mentioned Oklahoma, Missouri, Texas, and Iowa, they have passed similar legislation that either offered a tax refund exemption or didn't tax communications network equipment at all. So when I'm talking about the competitive disadvantage is that today, Kansas doesn't have a policy in place at the present moment.
But it's not that we're losing business to those states because like a typical competitive disadvantage is they're going to get it and we're not going to get it kind of a thought.
I wouldn't necessarily say that, Representative Turner. I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think this was more on the lines of just wanting to ensure that as economies around us are making positive legislation that has shown a positive impact in terms of more connectivity investment, we want to make sure that we're basically playing in that same arena.
And that more connectivity investment would be because as this federal money comes to do build out,
yes,
as you bid a contract, you could bid it that you won't be paying sales tax in order to accomplish that amount of work.
I'm not the economics guy, but I won't be able to go deep into the economics. What I'm saying is that, we just want to be able to leverage these one-time federal legacy resources and make sure that we have smart tax policies in place that allows us to be able to compete.
Okay, one more question if I could. It's kind of in the vein of an earlier question about will Kansas customers see benefit, but what determines your rates? Do you go through a rate setting process where you cost based, or is it pretty much what the market will bear?
That's an awesome question, Representative Turner. I'm not at liberty to answer that, but I'm happy to run the traps with my colleagues and circle back with you.
Okay, I think it's what the market will bear, but anyway, I'll let it go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And not to oversimplify it here, but would it be fair to say that a dollar not spent on sales tax is another dollar that you could invest in the infrastructure?
That's a beautiful way to put it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I know this isn't an AT&T bill, but you did request the bill be introduced. Could you answer the question where the $40 million came up from? Is that kind of based on the general deployment in the state? It seems like a very broad bill. It seems like, cell service, broadband, TV service. There's a lot of things that could be encompassed here. Are other states, do they have limitations on theirs? Is that kind of in line with what other states are doing?
The state of Oklahoma has a cap of $41 million and Texas has a cap of $50 million. So we've recognized that we're not as big as Texas nor Oklahoma, kind of like we're somewhat in the middle in terms of population size. As well as a recommendation from one of our colleagues, can't remember, don't quote me on this one, our colleagues, they ran the economic study in terms of what the cap can be, and I want to say they initially took this assessment under a few years back, and it came with 20 million, and they believe, given the fact of inflation, some of the things that have happened, we felt as though 40 million would be a healthy starting point for us today.
Yeah, thank you. Committee, are there any further questions for this conferee? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, yes, Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think this has been asked and answered. By getting the sales tax returned, how much do you think that, could you quantify that, and how much rural Kansas will get people coming in to try to help us get internet?
I cannot confidently answer that question, Representative, but I'm more than happy to have a further discussion with my colleagues internally and circle back with you. I can't predict the economic impact from it immediately, the job creation, the job growth, what it can look like. I'm today.
I have to tell you, one of the biggest things county officials tell me or ask me is to help them get any kind of internet. Now, Johnson County, Wyandotte County, all the metro areas are able to get hotspots for the most part. They can go to a coffee shop. They can drive down the street. They can go into fast food and get. That's not an ability that rural Kansans have, most rural Kansans. And I think we're remiss in not trying to figure that out, because it's great for everyone else to have internet. And I can't complain because I do. I have good internet. But I have a lot of neighbors that don't.
Right.
So thank you, Mr. Chair.
And this is why, you know, we are laser focused on figuring out what does this public-private partnership with this one-time legacy federal dollars, whether that's bipartisan infrastructure dollars, American Rescue Plan funding, or the CARES Act dollars, right? So this is, you know, a bit of like this one-time legacy opportunity where we can forge these public-private partnerships. We recognize that state and counties, our local municipalities have finite resources, and so do we. So what better way than try to solve for this problem than all of us working together hand in hand, right? And we understand that there's no one solution or one-time fix-all kind of deal. We have to be very flexible, nimble, and open to suggestions, recommendations, and trying to figure out how do we bridge this digital divide that's been taking place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, are there any further questions? Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I keep hearing about this one-time legacy program, right? The one-time legacy, lay the fiber down, get it out. Would you be an advocate to like repealing this once that has happened?
Repeat the question for me one more time, Representative Kessler.
Once this legacy has been, fiber's been laid down, the legacy implementation that you've been talking about, getting broadband spread it out, would you advocate for repealing this tax rebate once that's done?
I'm not at liberty to provide the answer to that question at the present moment.
Do you know if there's any other states that have a sunset on their program?
I do not. I'm not aware of any other states that have a sunset, but I am aware of the fact that I'll use two examples. In the state of North Dakota, they looked at eliminating their sales tax. They eliminated sales tax in 2009 as it relates to communication network equipment, and they saw a significant threefold investment increase from $48 per capita to $148 per capita. And I will use another example of the state of Iowa, who did a multi-year reduction rate back in 2006, where they went from 4.7% to 1.8%, in which basically they saw a raise in investment per capita from $39 to about $46.47. So I think there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of what the mechanics of the bill can look like, and I'm more than happy to share the additional studies with the committee for further discussion.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. So in my rural district, your company has caused me lots of heartburn, because you're the internet provider, and we're sparsely populated, so I get the numbers don't work. So when the numbers don't work, do you relinquish your claims on that territory? I know those are protected franchise territories. Do you, when you see that it's not going to work, do you walk, or do you go ahead and hang on to that?
I'm not prepared to answer that question, Representative Turner, but I'm happy to take that one back and have another conversation with you about it.
I would appreciate that.
Of course, most definitely.
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I don't know who to ask this, but we have a map of exempt, and can somebody explain that? Are you able to explain that, Mr. Ruffin? Do you know what I'm talking about? We have that in our S drive. And according to that, it shows that there are 23 states, including Kansas, that manufacturing is exempt, but the communications is taxable. Can you explain how that works?
Left my map. Repeat the question one more time for me, please.
It says manufacturing is exempt, but communications is taxable. Can you explain what that applies to?
Basically, it's the manufacturing equipment exempt, but communications equipment is not. And when we talk about communications equipment, we're referring to all the things that kind of build out the network, the fiber, the routers, all the back of the house things that kind of make our macro towers and our connectivity go. In terms of the manufacturing equipment, I don't have that one readily available with me, but I'm happy to come back to you and clarify that for you a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's supplies that you buy to manufacture the hardware or something. Is that?
I'm not confident to answer that question. That I don't want to speak out of turn on that one.
Okay, I understand. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Committee, are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Committee, our next proponent we have listed as Eric Stafford with Kansas Chamber. We do not have any walk-up music, and it does not appear that he's inside.
He's holding out for walk-up music.
We will consider that written-only testimony. Next proponent listed is John Federico with Kansas Cable Telecommunications Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not very often I appear in front of your committee. I appreciate the opportunity. And as a lobbyist in this building, there's not many days that you feel blessed in the State House, but given the fact that I'm going second instead of first, my heart goes out to Mr. Ruffin. My name is John Federico of the Federico Durst Consulting Group, and I appear before you today as the president of the Kansas Cable Telecommunications Association. I have with me Megan Bottenberg from Cox Communications if there are any questions better answered by a provider or any that I can dodge. Cable operators in Kansas provide more broadband services to Kansas homes and businesses than anyone else. And really since the inception of cable television, cable operators have been innovators. And I think that's important to note because as this conversation ensues, it's not just about incenting expansion. This is a technology that is not a static technology. There are constant upgrades to make sure we are providing the most technologically advanced telecommunication services possible. So I do appreciate all the talk of expansion, and we are front and center in those conversations with ARPA money and broadband grants. But it's a vast issue out there of needs by the consumers that we are all struggling trying to meet. Bills such as 2499 become critically important in the state-by-state fight for scarce dollars available to our member companies. And really, we don't need to look much. Wherever you were on the Apex bill, it kind of paints a picture of what the environment is out there. It's not an infinite number of available dollars to invest. They look at what the regulatory environment is. They look at what the tax structure is on where they should put these dollars. And these decisions are not being made in offices in Kansas. They're, these are executives somewhere that probably tip more in a year than I make, but they're looking at all these factors to decide where we're going to invest. And it does make a difference as to what you're setting as tax policies or incentives. I'll be very brief and tell you that we stand in strong support of this bill as the cable industry. We do offer some amendments, and Adam, I don't know if I messed up and we're supposed to bring them, or it is the protocol that you provide those, but unfortunately, I did not bring the amendments.
Yeah, we're not working the bill, we're just hearing it today, so if you want to go ahead and discuss those amendments, we can view those when it comes time to work the bill, but feel free to go ahead and discuss.
I'll have to do that, and I'll do that, and I will make sure that everyone receives them. It was really an attempt to tighten up the bill a little bit. So the definition of internet access service, we are proposing to use the federal definition, which is the most commonly used definition in the telecom world, further defining what affiliate means in the bill. And that definition was taken out of Kansas statute already. And lastly, it was to tie back telecommunication services back to the tax code rather than in the telecom statute, as we're talking about tax policy here. They're relatively simple. I did vet them with all the interested telecommunication interested parties, and all were comfortable with the changes. And my apologies, Mr. Chairman. I will have those distributed quickly. With that, I'll close on the question that was asked, and I'll walk into the belly of the beast. What do you do with these savings? Does it go directly back to the consumer? It's, where's it going? It does allow you, through these savings, it's not an insignificant amount of savings, I will tell you, using any of our cable members as an example, and it would allow them to build out, to serve more homes that either don't have any options for a broadband provider or a video provider, or they don't have a competitive market. So the savings will be used to benefit the consumer, there is no doubt, either in the form of expansion or in the form of upgrades. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Just to follow right up along your last line there, is it true that a lot of the federal and state programs are really more targeted toward, there's extra money that is targeted specifically for your underserved or unserved areas, and it's really the company's choice which area they're trying to go after, but if they use those funds, this sales tax refund necessarily wouldn't be focused in those areas. But if a company is using some of the state or federal programs specifically directed toward the rural area, and I shouldn't say rural, because you can have underserved or unserved, what you might call metro areas, or just depending on which side of the street you live on sometimes. But
you're right. So the focus is, and we believe should be, on one, unserved areas where there's no options, there's no service available. And then secondly, underserved, where maybe it's not a competitive environment. And that's the focus. To a certain degree, we have asked that the people awarding these grants take into consideration that it's just not infrastructure, that adoption of internet services be taken into consideration. And you, as a legislative body, did approve funding for some expansion and some adoption. And by that, either they need a tutorial on how to connect to the internet, and some it is, I have it available on my street, but I can't afford it. So perhaps the state could step up and make more affordable this wonderful thing that I'm not able to take advantage of.
Committee, any questions? Representative Helgerson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Federico. And in your last comment, that's the crux of it for me. If we're going to give the industry $40 million, how much is going to shareholders? How much is going to companies that decide this is a loss leader? We're going to plow every penny back in because we want to become the monopoly in Western Kansas for the services. And I'm at a loss still to try to figure out what the model is and the business model that's going to be used, because your model, or the model for many cables, the small cables, is going to be different from than Cox, and it's going to be different than AT&T. The $40 million, we want to make sure we get the services that we have, but you and your industry have to give us some kind of guidance as to say, well, we're not going to put the money, it's not going to go back to the corporate headquarters in blank state, and it's going to be used. And if I could find somebody, whoever's doing it, that's going to say, I'm willing to do the loss leader and, do more services and not take any of the money, we want to look at that. Now, that's the challenge you have to get my vote. Because I look at this $40 million competitive with $40 million for sales tax on food or property tax reduction or anything else. But I'm also very sympathetic that we need to move to in this direction for the whole state. So, challenge is, the words competitive don't matter. I want to see something, and I want to see it pretty tied down, that the rural sisterhood and brotherhood are going to get more services if we do this, and not just going to get, the dance.
Well, Representative, I think that's a fair question, actually. And of course, with no authority to speak on anything, I would be hard pressed to believe that this effort is being made to enrich the corporation back into shareholders and what have you. I will tell you, this industry is as competitive as there is out there, and you have to keep up with everyone else. Secondarily, I will tell you that it is expensive. If you are launching into areas and laying fiber into communities, down streets, to homes, it is incredibly expensive. So in total, the amount is a lot of money, but it's not when you delve into some of these projects.
Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So kind of along these same lines, and we were earlier speaking of amendments, do you think your clients would be amenable to an amendment that assigns certain percentages of this $40 million to be spent in the areas you outlined, the unserved and the underserved, that a certain percentage of this money would have to be used in those areas?
Well, I can't speak for my members. That is something I would be happy if I have something to take back to them. I think about the complications of it. I think it's a noble notion to make sure it goes where it's needed most. I think about how hard it would be to regulate that, who provides that oversight. And there is certainly a focus from the Office of Broadband and the Department of Commerce on just that, making sure that these grants are warranted and they're going to places where they're needed most. So I can't tell you that I would be supportive or opposed to it. It's in line with how the cable industry feels that any of this money should be spent. Put it where it ain't first, and then put it into the next area of importance, which are the underserved areas. And I'm not dodging your question. I think I'm happy to work with you on anything.
Does your friend have any comments?
She's not my friend, darn it.
I pay him. We're not friends. Megan Bottenberg, Director of Government Affairs for Cox Communications here in Kansas. I would just simply say it would be something we'd be happy to consider, but for Cox's perspective, as John mentioned, we're always looking at where we can expand. And we are looking at how do we get to the unserved areas, but also how do we upgrade our infrastructure. We are currently doing a $5 billion project to upgrade our infrastructure over the next several years. And that will be able to provide all of our customers with 10 gig services. Right now we have 1 gig everywhere, but we're going to be able to give you 10 gig. And because that is the way our society is going. And so we're going to be prepared for that. So we, as John said, it's a static environment and technology. And so we're always upgrading, but we're always expanding as well because we want to get to every unserved home.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Megan. Come back, Megan. 2 things. Number one, could you expand? You just said you're building out, you're putting in new services to offer 10 gig service. So you're doing that with fiber to the home? How are you doing that? So you're leaving the coax in the ground and you're plowing in fiber?
We're doing both, actually.
Okay.
So to upgrade our current network, to provide 10 gig to every current home, we are taking out the coax and putting fiber deeper into the network. So it still may be coax that goes straight to your home, but you're going to have fiber that is deeper in that network. And so maybe it'll stop right by your street corner, and then it's coax into your home. That's one project. Again, private dollars that we are spending ourselves. We are building out to other areas, and we're using our own private dollars for that. For instance, doing a business, providing Cox Business Solutions to different areas of Kansas that we think are in need of our higher speeds and reliable network. Again, private dollars that we're using to help those businesses and those potential customers there. And then, of course, we are looking at unserved areas in the state. And what is the cost of that? Those costs can range from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars to get to more homes and more homes that are unserved. All of those new builds, of course, are all fiber to the home. So those are fiber. They will already be ready for 10 gig network.
And didn't you, Megan, participate Cox up north and did get a grant I think it was an unserved area, correct?
That is correct. So back in 2020, we received a CARES Act grant in the amount of about $1.3 million. We were able to use those funds to build to 450 unserved homes here in Kansas. One was in Dodge City, just outside of Dodge City in the Dodge Township. The second one was in Sedgwick County in both Keachai and Valley Center, between there, as well as Derby. And then the last area was here north of Topeka. That was our largest build. And that was the first time we had actually done a green build with fiber here in the Northeast Kansas area. Some of those residents literally would call either our market leader or myself every year asking us to build out to them for 15 straight years. I'm really glad they're not calling anymore, but.
Well, I was going to make a plea with everyone. I think we need to get some kind of good service to Representative Corbett. So I'm just throwing that out there.
I'm the next caller, just forget that last one.
So what's the number I need to call you at for the next 15 years? No, I'm kidding. Representative Corbett.
Thank you. I don't know which one would like this question, but for those of us that do live in, we call it rural Kansas, you call it unserved. Where do you see, and especially AT&T sitting back there, where do you see this expanding? I mean, I don't live this far from the building, and it's unserved, and my chairman may live further than that, and he's unserved. So, I mean, I love the 10 gig stuff, and I tell everybody, I would just like to get one bar, or I'd like to get my screen to light up. You know what I'm saying? Thank you.
You know, on a serious note, I think it starts with just what the chairman said, is identifying that not all needs are rural. There are rings around these urban centers that are also either unserved or underserved. Because the simple fact, whether you're in a rural area or one of these rings, it's expensive. You have to make the business case. That's right. And if you can't, you have to rely on grants or some type of subsidy. And that's where we find ourselves right now. Do I believe you're going to get it? I don't know. But this is where we're moving in the right direction. And it started with a broadband task force. Why is Kansas so far behind other states in focusing on expanding broadband and more adoption? So for the last 3 years, I would say, Jim, we're moving in the right direction as a state.
So one of the questions I might have, you know, one or two of my neighbors, I believe, are doing the satellite gig, you know, where it's just beamed down to them. But it would still be nice, you know, when you live out in the rural areas, you've got two buried lines that come to your house, to your business. And it's great for phone service, but you'd think there'd be some way, you know, we've talked back when I was in utilities. You've got all that rural electric line going all over the county, but we can't seem to get we can't use it for anything. But I know what you're saying. There's not enough people in rural Kansas to offset the cost of the build.
For 30 years, I would say that I was relatively unsympathetic to you, Representative Corbett, but I now live in an area where cable is not available to me, so my internet is through fixed wireless, and I rely on satellite for my video. So we're making do.
I share your pain.
Representative Baker.
So on that same trend, what I've learned, because I have some really remote areas in my district, and we have a cooperative phone company that has part of my district. That cooperative came in 2008, not a long time ago. And they started the fiber optics, and they were ahead of the curve. And so their territory, they have it. It's when we get to the national providers, and I understand economics. You know, it's which hat you want to wear. That as an investor in their stock, you don't want them to do that. But as somebody who goes out and sees your constituents, like people who live west of town at Dover, they don't have any service out there, and you feel bad for them. And on through Wabaunsee County and Southern Riley and Geary, that's a tough deal, and it's just a number. So I guess my question is, if the national companies can't make that work, maybe we need to relinquish that territory to the smaller cooperatives. Maybe there's a window there to unload some of that. Just a thought.
So I think you mentioned this twice, and there's probably people in the room better equipped to answer this. I don't think you need to relinquish a territory. I think you can go compete with anyone, anywhere.
Committee, are there any further questions? Seeing none in the room and none online. Oh, Representative Turner? Yeah. You always look, you wait until I look away and then you.
Yeah, I tried to time it perfectly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I guess I hear this issue of competitiveness, and as you said, it's an expensive process and you've got to compete, but the bill that we're discussing just changes the landscape for all players in the landscape, right? So everybody in Kansas is either going to be paying tax or not paying tax. Correct? So I don't see that it changes the competitive landscape within the state. And then the earlier conferee talked about other states, and I don't see that we're competing for Kansas, for the federal dollars that come, for example. The competition will be within the state of Kansas. We're not competing with Oklahoma to build out Kansas necessarily. So I'm just not understanding. It seems like it changes the playing field for all players, whether we pass this bill or if things stay as it is. Thank you.
I think you're exactly right. I won't speak for Mr. Ruffin, but when I reference competition, it is state by state by state. If our budget as Company X is this for upgrades and/or expansion, where should we put it? Within the state, you're right, where the competition exists is there are multiple providers that are applying for these grants. And it's a good process as long as there's a challenge provision in there to say, I'm already serving this area, so perhaps this is not where grant money ought to go. But when I spoke of competition, it is what's the regulatory and tax environment in Oklahoma, Arkansas, whatever. When they get down to making these decisions where we want to put our money, where should we?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Seeing none online, none in the room, thank you for your testimony. That is all the proponents appearing before the committee. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as a proponent for House Bill 2499? Seeing none, committee will direct your attention to the written-only testimony, proponent testimony. We have several within the pack. I do show that we have one opponent, Dave Traubert. Is he in the room? If not, we will consider that written testimony as an opponent. Is there anyone else wishing to appear either as neutral or as an opponent to House Bill 2499? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on the bill. And committee, that concludes our work for the week. We are adjourned. Thank you.